The title is Choosing Appropriate Legume Forage Species. Next slide, please. Well, the overview, what I'm going to look at, first of all, I'm going to give you an indication how you choose useful forage species. Also, I'm going to be talking about the forage growth dynamics, because that's important for you, how you're going to choose what species you need to have. And then I will go over attributes of major forage legume species. I can't cover them all. I'll cover the four legume that we commonly work with. Next slide, please. Okay, well, when you're choosing your forage species, first of all, you really want to know this is going to be pasture, grazing, or for hay or silage. If it is for pasture, we know the overall goal is to make the pasture stand, grow, and regrow. This have to be reliably, predictably, persistently. It will promote uniform grazing. You won't run out of feed if the stand will grow and regrow. So also, if it is harvested feed, then there'll be different species more appropriate. In fact, I want to tell you from the beginning, in our farm at the Nepean Research Farm, we don't have one legume species. We use quite few of them to fit the cropping system we need for our operation. And hopefully you can choose the right combination. Also, some of you might be using it as a rotational crop. Therefore, you can use a crop that has got a shorter lifespan. But in my opinion, for the majority of you or us, is that we need to look at stand that can live as long as we want it, persistent versus productivity in the short term. So you really want to get persistent instead of getting very high yield. In our climate here, we can grow outside clover. The first year is amazing. All farmer love it because in the seeding year, no other crop can produce it. Then it is short-lived. That's something that you really have to consider. The other you really need to look after is you're gonna have to look after restrictions, the soil conditions or any environmental factors, such as drainage, pH, fertility, animal, species competition, how it's going to work in your mixture if you're growing a mixture. And next, of course, you need to look at the maturity, when it matures, and the quality at maturity or beyond. So you can look after that. Next, please. Now, I'm showing you choosing appropriate grass, not going to be the topic of my talk, but I really want to bring a point to you. Majority of us in most of areas of Canada, particularly quite significant area in British Columbia, you don't grow legume on its own. You grow it in combination with grasses. Why that's very important? Because in our climate and in those particular situations, the grass will contribute to the bulk of forage use. It will add to the yield potential. And also, if it is grazing, it's going to reduce the risk of bloat in animals. And also, having it in combination with grasses is going to prevent the spread of weeds. Next, please. Okay, how do we choose the legume? First of all, we really want to why do we use legumes in a lot of words? For two major important roles. One, provide protein to livestock and higher quality, improved quality of the stand, and also to improve soil nitrogen with grasses. That's saving money from nitrogen, fertilizer, and so on. All right, next slide. So attributes you need to consider when choosing appropriate legume. You need to look, as I said before, on the sward dynamic in your stand. what if it is a mixture, what kind of grass mixtures you're going to use, how frequently you're going to graze it, or how frequently you're going to cut it. In fact, a lot of our dairy farmers in the Atlantic region, they harvest it more frequently. Like, for example, normally we have 2 cuts. Some of them, they have 3, 4, or 5 cuts. So therefore, the choice of the legume you're going to choose is very critical, because some of them won't tolerate the frequent clipping and harvesting. Then winter hardiness, the drought tolerance, grazing tolerance. I don't know if it is because of climate change or if it is to a cycle we're really getting in our region more frequently, getting drought in the summer, and we need some tolerance to that. And then tolerance to acidic soil. I would like you to really to consider that you put the lime on the surface and you get a good pH from the surface, but the subsoil is acidic and will affect your yield potential. So you really need to look at in that case, at the species that have some tolerance to soil acidity, even though when you apply the lime. And we did the studies on this, and we found that when we use subsoil, acidic subsoil versus the top 25, 30 centimeters, showing being lime, the pH of 6.5, we're losing potentially 25% of the yield. And that's very significant. Okay, next slide, please. I'm showing you this picture for 2 reasons. First of all, this is my favorite sward. When I walk in, it looks like the sward is just totally full. There's a grass, and there is a legume, and the legume is white clover. Next slide, please. So for white clover, what is the strength? It has high nutritive value because technically you're grazing the leaves or harvesting the leaves. There is no stems, and a very potential to contribute to increase protein content and so on. The other important thing is that the rapid regrowth and excellent adaptation to frequent intensive defoliation. Many of the species you're going to find later on cannot tolerate that. The other thing is very difficult to kill when it really spreads and fill the gaps in the sward. And also it produces seed, and the seed in the soil become a seed bank. So it will be, comes along and so on. And of course, it is highly palatable. Next slide, please. What are the weaknesses? These are going to be big weaknesses. We'll summarize it toward the end of the presentation. White clover, if you're grazing it, it's got bloating. It's a bloating legume, so bloating is a requirement. It is we talk about alfalfa being the queen of the forages. For pasture, the white clover is, but the problem is it requires excellent drainage, intensive management, high fertilizer, very demanding kind of species. And also it's got low yielding and a low drought tolerance, because technically it got very shallow, very surface-like, not deep roots, and very shallow rooting system. Next, please. Okay, red clover is the next one. Actually, I'm showing you a slide of red clover. This one, this particular slide is showing you we stockpiling that. It's one of the excellent stockpiling. It stockpiled very well and provide good for grazing or later harvesting if you need to. Next slide. The other important thing, the strength of it, is cheap. The seeds are very readily available, and the cheapest seed you can buy for legume per se. It establishes readily, including when you frost seed it. It is the best frost seeding legume. You can frost seed it, you get better establishment. It's a high end fixing. It fixes very good nitrogen, and it also transfers it to the grasses if you have a mixture. Of course, it's great for plow down uses in arable crops. It's got, again, with the seed, there is a good dormancy. With the seed that you have, what didn't germinate will germinate later to fill up the gap later on. Of course, it is excellent for silage, produces very good yield, but you really have to be aware of protein buffering effect. That will really affect the intake by livestock of the silage. Next slide, please. Weaknesses, it's a bloating legume. It's short-lived biennial habit. Majority of the seed you're gonna purchase, it's only establishment year, good first production year, and then it really start dying on you. However, there are some newer cultivars. The average life of the newer cultivars, about 3.5 production years. Again, for grazing, some people are afraid of the estrogen content of this species because it could affect reproductive herds and so on. So that's something you need to really consider. Next slide, please. Alfalfa. The strength of it is has very high seasonal yield. That's very important. The other thing is excellent for midsummer production, and also it retains quality well into the fall. Next slide, please. Total list of weaknesses. It's a bloating legume. It's not very competitive in mixture. When you put it in mixtures, it doesn't compete very well. Stands are inheritably unstable unless properly managed. You really must intensively manage the sward with sufficient rest period. So if you're grazing every 2-3 weeks, rotating on it, it's not going to be a good species to have. Then quality rapidly decline post early bud stage. It quickly sleeps down. In some region, it is undefined risk, particularly in the southern region of Canada, tendency for clumpiness, and that really affects also many aspects in yield and productivity. And for some area, you could have rust, and it is susceptible to rust. And I don't know anybody have been breeding alfalfa with rust tolerance. They're breeding for other important stuff. This is also could affect the spottiness as reduced quality of that forage, but also with impact yield. Next slide, please. Here it is in our region. This is actually tile drain field. It's a heavy soil, and look at it on top of the tile where you see there's alfalfa, and between it's winter killed. For us, the winter kill most detrimental because because we have high moisture, there's waterlogging effect in the fall and the spring, and that's very detrimental. In fact, if you look at this particular slide, we lost 2/3 of the forage yield from this particular field. By the way, this is a field from the Pan Research Farm where when I first started working, I thought alfalfa is the greatest thing because that was one PhD was on it. There it is, awakening. But you know, I am a Greek and I don't give up. I try and try again. Let's look at the next slide. So we started selecting in the field for tolerance to fall and spring waterlogging. Now we have to test it to see how tolerant it is. So I developed a simulated condition where we can, on the left-hand side slide, is we put this is in single rows. That each row has 6 plants. We replicate it. In the one below it, on the left, you can see there's water, and some of them we flood them, and some are controlled. And in early September or late September, we drain the water, and then we cover it on the top right. We cover it with the styrofoam simulating snow cover. And then in the spring, we can take it out and flood it again, and then take it in a greenhouse and assess it. Actually, as you can see on the right-hand side, the fall and spring is the worst looking towards that from that particular study. All right, you tell me this is actually, it's a simulated condition. Let's take a look at the result from that. Next slide, please. AC caribou and apica are the best, our standard cultivar used to be when I was working on this. So I really want to compete with it. As you can see, the light blue, the y-axis is showing percent survival, how many plants survived under these structures. In the blue one, there is no flooding, the control. So obviously, apica and caribou are doing much better than CRS 1001. By the way, CRS 1001, now it's called AAFC Truman. We'll talk more about that shortly. But when we flooded it, take a look. The CRS 1001, it really practically didn't have any effect. Mind you, if you look at the y-axis, 50% of the plant didn't survive. That is still very good for alfalfa, but it impacts the same thing. The pure stand of non-controlled one, still you're not getting in survival when you seed. You seed approximately, you can count 200 plant per square meter, but in the production years, you're going down to below 50. And in Ontario, where I grew up, we can get a full yield with no effect if we have 20 plants well balanced in a 1 meter square. All right, well, I told you this was done in a simulated testing. Let's go to the field. Next slide, please. We set up an infrastructure. You see that box in front of, in the middle, there is drainage and sub-irrigation system that goes all the way toward the trees. And there are strips, if you look at the right and the left, there are strips with different management. We can manage we manage the field not only for fall and spring flooding. We manage that not to be flooded at all, but in the summer when we have not enough moisture, we provide irrigation either to sub-irrigation or in the surface irrigation. Next slide, please. Well, there it is. That's the same layout. You look at the right-hand side, every entry, there is over 18 entries in this particular line. Elite line, we're testing them to see how they do in the field. So obviously they survive very well. This is the first and second production look just like that. Now, go to the next slide. Okay, here's the next slide. If you're looking at it, that's the same strip. Mostly all those, a majority of the plant, the line, were winter killed. But if you show me the next slide, please. If you look at closer, this is almost near flowering. You can see there are lines with that where there's a blue line, a blue marker and white. They go the whole row. That whole row is 3 meters wide, and it has 10 plants of alfalfa. So obviously there are some plants, some lines survive very well and to tolerate fall and spring waterlogging. Next slide, please. This is how it looked like from the front. Very good stand of alfalfa for these particular lines. Next slide, please. All right, we have 12 entries, 12 cultivars, and the black one is the seasonal, kept no flooding, we irrigated, and the optimum yield, we usually average between 8 to 10 tons per hectare for pure stand of alfalfa fully managed with. But when we look at the fall and spring flooding, you can see the average of the 12 cultivars dropped to below 4, while CRS 1001 and another one next to it, TA 08106, they have almost around 5 tons per hectare. So they really, nothing is totally immune. They set them back, but they don't kill them and they survive. Next slide, please. There it is. This is AAFC Truman. It's called the testing CRS 1001. It's a rhizomatous variety of alfalfa, and it is commercialized by Quality Seed. You can see in the right-hand side how it spread through those below ground stems. That's what rhizome is. And if you look at the left-hand slide, this is where we grow it in mixtures with Timothy, meadow fescue, bluegrass, and reed canary grass. And in midsummer, this is the 4th production year. On the right-hand side, Truman, and the left-hand side is a white clover. So it's got a very good advantage. Next slide, please. Trefoil. By the way, I'm a bit biased on trefoil because I'm a trefoil breeder, but I think it's great, but you can lower my judgment a bit lower, but still a great species. The issue with trefoil is very little work compared to alfalfa. In fact, I would say that in North America, there is only 4 breeding centers, and it's not the main species they work with. It is one of the main species I work with myself. Next slide, please. Trefoil strength, non-bloating. In the books, and what you see, it says short-lived perennial plant. I have a question mark there. It persists well, especially if you start losing the stand, you can allow it to go to full bloom, and it will set seed, and the seed shatters. And also, what's so important about trefoil compared to alfalfa, when it starts flowering and the quality level stays constant because it's different growth. It just so it holds its quality much longer. It is well suited for extensive or unmanaged pasture and tough conditions. When properly managed, it's rival to alfalfa. I'm going to show you some slide how rival it is from animal gain. Quality retained, like I said, post-flowering stage compared to alfalfa. It frost seed readily, not as good as red clover, but much better than alfalfa. Tolerant to lower pH level and imperfect drainage, which would kill alfalfa and white clover for sure. And deep-rooted, convey drought tolerance, reliable mid-season performer. Next slide, please. Weakness, it's got lower yielding than alfalfa. So if you need, you might have to grow more acreages for your livestock numbers. Some people find that it's hard to establish, but good, once you learn, you'll be able to do it very well. Maybe less palatable owing to tannin content. The reason I'm put that point here, there's only some slides that shows that, because if in Australia, the variety produced in Australia, they have high tannin, very high tannin compared to what we have. So if you are buying common seed, and God knows where it's coming from, and they're high in tannin, palatable, they will go down. It dries more slowly than alfalfa if you're going to make hay or silage, and it's hard to retain in intensive managed pasture. Why is that? Because the cattle is very palatable. They go and graze it and graze it and regraze it, and it's very challenging to really sustain it. Next slide, please. Here's a study we done with BCRC under the beef cluster. We have, if you look at trefoil grazing in a complex mixture component, The trefoil, you can see almost half the yield of what alfalfa is. Grazing days is lower than alfalfa, but cattle gain kilogram per hectare is higher than alfalfa, and an average daily gain in 1.1 compared to 0.7. That's very important because if you're finishing animal, this is a very good species to have. It will enhance finishing animal. Next slide, please. One of the aspects of it for improved quality is when I did this study based on my master's degree and also later on. If you look at the if you grow it, the percent true protein, it's around 70 to 100% in the different species and variety. But in Saranac, which is alfalfa in that test, when in silage, the available soluble non-protein nitrogen increases. In trefoil, people think because it got tannin, it also will reduce the proteolysis, reduce the protein degradation. But guess what? Varieties are very important. The one that there was very little different in protein degradation is AC Langel. This is a variety I released in the mid-90s. Thanks. Next slide, please. Now, also, we find it. This is an early result we've been looking at. If you look at the gastrointestinal nematode development, these are for grazing. They cause diarrhea to sheep and affect, and so on, the animal performance, whether sheep or beef. And when you look at the species, you find trefoil has lower number of eggs and of this particular nematode, which is very detrimental. This is a study currently is underway, and this is early result. Next slide, please. Now, how much time I have, Serena? How much time I have?
You have about 5 to 10 more minutes.
Okay, good. I'm showing you here a study we did where we looked at it legume grown with a grass combination. Management is very important. Let's see the next slide. Management of the species. If you have a rotational grazing in a pasture, the left top square is got a low yield but high legume. Below it is low yield and low legume, and the right-hand side, the top square, the rectangle is high yield, high legume, and one below it, high yield but low legume. If you have a rotational grazing, guess what? The green one is white clover. There's no debate. Let's look at the next slide. If you give it a mid-season stockpiling to give it strength, alfalfa takes over, no question about it, in terms of, yeah. Next slide, please. Now, it doesn't matter what legume you're gonna grow. Forage establishment is the most critical thing. This is where the profitability, you have to have a good stand by establishing very well. I'm not going into this, but Dr. Glover gave a talk at the Forage conference. If you want, you can listen to her tell you about it. Next slide, please. Now, I'm showing you no-till, because we find that this is economically sustainable. We're looking at two methods, sod seeding or frost seeding. Let's take a look at the slide. Next slide, please. This is the machine we use for sod seeding. It's a tie seeder. Next slide, please. And this is a cyclone seeder over with the, with the four-wheeler. And if you look very closely, I don't know if you see it, this is frost seeded on the 3rd of April, this particular experiment. This is a beef cluster study with BCRC, and we're trying to increase the number, replace the legume we lost from the previous cluster study. Next slide, please. Now, the frost seeding is the black bar, and the red one is the sod seeding. We're looking at the result here. In the seeding year, we got from the legume component when we did botanical separation, an establishment here, we got all, there was no, this particular stand had 0 legume and 0, so we got approximately between 4 and 5%. When you go to the first production year, we got about 12%. You know what? That's good, but not good enough. You really need to have around 25 to 40% legume and to sustain it. We lost, with COVID, we lost 1 year of study, but we're hoping we can catch up again. Next slide, please. Now I'm showing you this picture for trefoil. This particular field, we started losing the stand and we let it flower, set seed, and we got this kind of stand coming through. So it is a very good species to use it and manage it. You really have to love it and you know, and grow it. And in fact, we were in Utah attending a conference. We went to a tour to a organic dairy producer, and he was growing this trefoil and bragging about it. And I thought, you know, he was growing some American variety, so I want to know what it is. I asked him. He said, "No, it's Canadian." I said, "So I thought cheap seed, Leo." He said, "No, it's not Leo." Then the one I'm currently, you can get seed of it is AC Bruce, which is a variety I've developed. He said, "No, it's not AC Bruce." I said, "Well, I give up." I said, "AC Angel?" He said, "Yes, it is AC Angel." He was getting excellent milk yield from it. Next slide, please. 20-second summary. What I ranked the species based on those parameters I talked to you about. The best one is got a 3 number, and the poorest one has got 1. So if you look at persistent, all of them seem to see reasonably well. Drainage, alfalfa got 1, white clover got 1, and trefoil and alside clover got 3. And if you go to pH, acidic soil, both alfalfa and white clover got 1, while trefoil got 3. And for grazing tolerance, most of them are good. And low fertility, outside clover can do well, but the rest of them are 2. And when we look to species compatibility, which that's very important, outside clover is not good, and the rest of them are 2 and 3. So here it is. You pick your choice. Don't be affected by my bias, but I think you're gonna love trefoil. Beautiful flowers, and that's it, Serena. Thank you.